Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating true story from colonial America. A story about what happens when love, duty, and social rules all collide. So let's travel back to 1754, shall we? We're going to piece together a really personal story. And on the surface, it seems like it's just about one couple's, dilemma. But what it really does is pull back the curtain on a surprising truth about life and love in early America. All right, so our story kicks off with this young guy who's facing what looks like a major personal crisis. But here's the thing, as we're about to find out, his problem was actually surprisingly common, and it tells us so much about the world they lived in.
Okay, so let's meet the man at the center of all this. His name is Norman Seaver. He's 20 years old, living in Sudbury, Massachusetts, and the year is 1754. And really, by all accounts, this guy was a total model citizen.
So, Norman was a hard-working farmer. They called him husbandman back then, and also a skilled carpenter. I mean, after his father died, he totally stepped up. He became the head of the family, taking care of his mom and his younger siblings. He was, basically the perfect marriage prospect. Ambitious, responsible, exactly the kind of guy parents would be thrilled to have their daughter marry.
But as you might have guessed, behind this picture-perfect image, Norman had a pretty big problem. One that was about to complicate everything and maybe even threaten his reputation.
And here it is, Sarah Read, the woman he loved and fully intended to marry. She was pregnant. In a place like colonial Sudbury, this wasn't just a complication. It was a race against the clock.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. Their scandal, it wasn't as scandalous as you might think, not even close. Historians actually estimate that in mid-18th century New England, a whopping 30 to 40%, get that, 30 to 40, of first kids were conceived before the wedding. So what was going on here?
Well, a lot of it came down to this idea of a pre-contract. You can think of it like an informal but totally socially accepted engagement. Once a couple made it public that they were going to get married, the community kind of looked at them as basically married already. Intimacy was often tolerated, but there was one huge rule. You absolutely had to make it official and have that wedding ceremony before the baby was born. So for Norman and Sarah, the path forward was pretty clear, but it wasn't simple. It had a really critical first step. Before any wedding could happen, Norman had to do the proper thing. He had to go ask Sarah's father for his permission. I mean, just try to put yourself in her father's shoes, right? His name was Isaac Reed. On the one hand, Norman seems like a great guy. He's hardworking, responsible, from a good family. But the concerns, they were totally real. Is this young man really stable enough to support another family when he's already supporting his own mother and siblings? And of course, you've got the social pressure, that ticking clock to get this done before the neighbors start talking. Well, in the end, practicality and Norman's good character won out. Isaac Reed gave his blessing. And just like that, the wedding plans were on. And I mean urgently on.
Okay, so with the dad's blessing, that clock started ticking even louder. This wasn't going to be some big fancy celebration, no way. This was going to be a practical wedding, stripped down to the absolute essentials, really reflecting just how urgent and no frills their situation was.
And check out this timeline. It really shows you what a race this was. They find out about the pregnancy in late 1754. They have to get permission and get married by March 14th, and then their daughter is born less than 2 months later, on May 3rd. That is cutting it close. I mean, it just shows the incredible pressure they were under. Sarah was probably around 7 months pregnant when they said their vows. And how do we know all this? Because the proof is right there in the historical record. This is the actual entry from the official Sudbury Town record. It's not a story, it's history, documenting their marriage on March 14, 1755. It's incredible that we can still see this today. So yeah, you gotta forget everything you've seen in the movies about big, fancy weddings. Theirs would have been the complete opposite. A really simple civil ceremony, maybe just at the house of a local justice of peace. The only people there? Immediate family, a few witnesses. Sarah wouldn't have had a special wedding gown, she would have just worn her best dress. The goal here wasn't a party. It was all about one thing and one thing only, making this marriage legal before that baby arrived. All right, so now they're legally married. Norman and Sarah can finally officially start their life together. But that didn't mean they got to ride off into the sunset to their own little cottage. Oh no, it meant Sarah moving into an already crowded house with Norman's entire family. And then, on May 3rd, 1755, they made it, just under the wire. Their daughter, Eunice, was born, and she was born into a legal, two-parent home.
With her first breath, that whole frantic, stressful courtship was finally over. Their journey as a family could actually begin.
So this new little family is living with Norman's mom and his siblings, and they do something that's just a really beautiful gesture of unity. They name their new baby Eunice, after Norman's mother, her paternal grandmother. And this wasn't just a nice thing to do. It was a very public way of honoring the woman who welcomed Sarah into her home and who was going to be an absolutely crucial source of support and wisdom for this new mother.
So, from this really rushed, kind of uncertain start, Norman and Sarah went on to build an absolutely remarkable and lasting life together.
Yeah, that first baby, Eunice, she was just the start. They would go on to have, get this, 13 children. 13! And that marriage, the one that started with a ticking clock and so much pressure, it lasted for 32 years, a long, committed marriage that only ended with Norman's death in 1787. I mean, just stop and think for a second about everything they lived through. They built this huge family, they survived a revolution, in fact, Norman even served as an officer in the Revolutionary War, and they are part of the generation that literally forged a new nation. In a way, their own personal, turbulent story kind of mirrored the birth of America itself. So what can we take away from this one family's story? Well, it shows us how a community could be flexible. How they could bend the rules when it came to something as practical and important as keeping a family together. And it's a great reminder that your life isn't defined by how it starts, even if it's a difficult start. It's about the foundation you build from there. Their story began with a broken rule, but it ended with this incredible legacy. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? In the end, how much do the rules we set for ourselves really matter when faced with the power of love, family, and the simple need to survive?